Our second speaker of the afternoon session is Sraman Mukherjee. He's an assistant professor of visual arts at Ashoka University. His research interests include exploring interfaces between past and present in the constitution of the disciplinary and institutional domains of archaeology, museums, and art history, and in tracing the biographies of sites, objects, and images across South and mainland Southeast Asia, which I know is also a topic dear to Rick's heart. His recent publications include an article entitled New Province, Old Capital, Making Patna Pataliputra, which appeared in IESHR in 2009, and Relics in Transition, Material Meditations in Changing Worlds in Ars Orientalis in 2018. Is it 2009 or 2019? I think that's probably that first one.
I think that was the very first thing I ever
okay. So that's, okay. So excellent. He has also co-edited a book entitled Imagining Asia's Actors, Networks, Sites, published in 2019. Building on these works, his talk today is titled Fashioning Relics, Making Sites, Temples, Museums, and Parks of Buddhism. So welcome, Sraman.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Rebecca and Sumati, for including me in this wonderful celebration of the contributions of Rick and in many contributions in the anniversary of the 60th anniversary of the American Institute of Indian Studies. This paper, which is kind of still in the making because I was in the field 3 days back, so is actually the last part of a series of studies which developed when I was doing my postdoc with Rick on the 19th and 20th century lives of Buddhist corporeal relics that traveled from various parts of South Asia to Southeast Asia, Europe, East Asia. What I had been looking at so far is predominantly the formal material constitutions of the relics as they moved across political and cultural spaces. And what I had not paid much attention to were the sites where the relics moved to ultimately. So I was mainly talking about the movement of the relic from an archaeologically excavated site or a museum, the accessioned relic in a museum, to a new built Buddhist temple. I had not had the opportunity yet to quite look at the site of where the relic would move itself, because I was concentrated predominantly on the formal material reconstitutions that happened in the body of the relic, in the process of their movement, in the process of their journeys. What I try to do in this paper, very briefly, is to look at the site itself. And while looking at the site, the focus of my paper has, I'm very sorry for this, has shifted slightly from the abstract that I submitted, and hence the change in the subtitle, Fashion Relics Making Sites Bamiyan in Bangkok. So I'll be looking at the site, this particular site of Wat Saket in Bangkok. On February 20th, 2017, two 2,000-year-old manuscript fragments from the Bamiyan Valley and part of the Buddhist manuscript collections of the Norwegian business tycoon and collector Martin Schoen were gifted to Thailand to be housed in Bangkok's monastery Wat Saket, encompassing among a number of viharas, cloisters, shrines, residence of monks, and Bangkok's only man-made mount, the Golden Mount, or the Phakao Thong. The ceremonial presentation of the manuscript fragments at Wat Saket was closely orchestrated by the Mahachulalongkorn Raja Vidyalaya University in collaboration with Thai and Norwegian government. This is the Chulalongkorn University, basically the oldest university of the country. In collaboration with Thai and Norwegian governments. Present among several dignitaries were Martin Schuen, his wife Bodil Schuen, Vinasu Kriyanegam, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Thailand, Fra Brahmasit, the Prime Buddhist representative of the kingdom, Professor Jens Breivik of Oslo University, who had long been associated with the translations, editing, and publication of the Gandharan manuscripts in the Schuen collection. A ceremonial presentation of the manuscript fragments was followed by a procession to the top of the Golden Mount, which meant actually climbing up 344 steps to the top of the Golden Mount, and a preliminary opening of a man-made cave at the base of the mount designed to house a 10-meter copy of one of the Bamiyan Buddhas destroyed by the erstwhile Taliban government of Afghanistan in 2011. On conclusion of ceremonies at Wat Saket, the Schwens, Jens Breivik, and other dignitaries visited the Grand Palace to pay their respects to the late King Bhumibol. Bhumibol had died a year earlier, and he was still he was still being displayed on public view. He was still on public view for the paying, so that the nation could pay homage. In the evening, a reception was arranged for them at the government house, and the Deputy Prime Minister and Pra Brahmasit presented Martin Schuen with commemorative artifacts as a mark of gratitude for his general gift to the Thai nation. In his speech, Schuen reciprocated the gesture, thanking the government and the Sangha of the Kingdom of Thailand and Professor Breivik for his dedicated years of research on the Gandharan manuscripts, and for his role as a key facilitator of multi-sited exhibitions and tours of Bamiyan manuscripts from the collection beginning in Thailand in 2010, leading to this ultimate gift. Schuen rounded up the speech on the following note. As a collector, I begin, quote, as a collector, I have always been driven by this need to study and conserve the best of human civilization. It is very gratifying to know that these two fragments are in care and protection of a living community of adherents. The manuscript fragments that come from the Schuen collection, which come from the Bamiyan Valley, and I'll talk more about that in a while, had been previously subject of intense scholarship research extending number of years, preceding that collection, years of restoration, piecing the fragments together literally. So, from 2010 onwards, multi-sited exhibition beginning in Thailand, moving across various countries in South and Southeast Asia, including India, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia. So why were these endangered manuscript fragments previously objects of collection, connoisseur shaped years of scholarly research, and multi-sited, carefully curated exhibitions spanning nation states across South and Southeast Asia gifted to be enshrined in a Buddhist monastic complex? And more importantly, why out of the several monasteries that dot Bangkok today, why was Wat Saket? Because Wat Saket is not class 1 royal monastery, it is class 2. It's not Wat Phra Kaew is in the Wat Temple of the Emerald Buddha is the class 1. Why was Wat Saket chosen as the site of enshrinement of these fragments? And once enshrined, what lives did these manuscript fragments assume? Did they still remain objects of study, scholarship in some sense, or did they become something else, object of ritual veneration, or did they lead to those two lives simultaneously? How do we begin to read this cave and the reconstructed 10-meter Bamiyan Buddha at the base of Watsakhet? Trying to unpack some of these questions, this paper proposes to explore the notion of sites as mobile entities. It seeks to map their peripatetic character as an intrinsic condition of their existence. Sites in this scope of study are traveling Buddhist traces circulating across a range of political and cultural spaces across South and mainland Southeast Asia from the late 19th century to the present. The making of sites are traced in ongoing dialogues forged between these traces and the curated spaces they have come to inhabit. Let us begin our journeys with the traveling sites, the manuscripts and their fragments. The gift of the manuscript fragments, so I call this section Leaves and Fragments, Collecting Scholarship, Display and Gifts. The gift of the manuscript fragments in 2012 was the culmination of close to 2 decades long collecting, acquisition, conservation, indexing, critical annotated translations and publications, and finally multi-sited traveling exhibitions of the restored manuscript fragments. The manuscript project, titled Buddhist Manuscripts in the Sraman Collection, was established on the basis of an informal meeting in Leiden, a meeting of the Institute of Advanced Studies, International Institute of Advanced Studies, IIS, in 1996. It was a collaboration between scholars across universities, and the formal agreement with Martin Schoen was probably reached a year after the initial meeting of scholars. From that period onwards, with running over more than 1,000 manuscripts, running into some 5,000 leaves and fragments, and around 7,000 microfragments written on palm leaves, birch barks, leather, copper. The manuscripts have been dated to a chronological span from the 2nd to the 7th and early 8th centuries of the Common Era. The script in the manuscripts have been deciphered as representing 3 different writing systems: Brahmi, Kharoshthi, and Bactrian variant of Greek. From the paleographic style, they have been dated, the dates have been arrived at. Now, despite these years of research that have gone into the manuscript, and this part has to do more with the research that went into the manuscript to begin with. And by the time the first of these exhibitions were mounted in 2010 in Thailand, 3 volumes of annotated translations of these Bamiyan manuscripts from the Sraman collection had been already published. Despite these years of researches, there were a couple of questions that remain unanswered by the time the manuscript went up for exhibition, for their very first exhibition, and it remains that way till today. The first is the standard art historical and archaeological question of provenance. These manuscripts are generally, they're traced back to the Bamiyan Valley, originating probably in the Gilgit, not very far from where the two Buddhas used to stand, but we exactly do not know the caves where they came from. And part of the problem is part of the problem is stems from the fact of how the manuscripts were actually collected. The manuscripts were collected not, by the Shuan collection, the manuscripts were collected not from Bamiyan directly, but from a substantial part of it comes from from London when the manuscripts went up in the antiquity market, and this is even before the demolition of the Buddhas, when the country is wrecked by wars, military aggression, a number of antiquities would be regularly smuggled out of that region. That's how they ended up, and the Shuan collection goes on to lay their legal claims over the manuscript collection. But so it is one part. So the questions of provenance then masks one of the ways in which, the questionable ways in which the manuscripts were collected. The other part that opens up is also that it seems that not all the manuscripts of the Shuan collection, which are termed Bamiyan collection, the Bamiyan Buddhist manuscript collection, not all of them would have come in from the Bamiyan region. Not all of them came from Afghanistan, actually. In fact, it was argued that, and identified that part of the collection, or a substantial part of the collection, could have come from the Gilgit region, and a part of it could have come from the Gilgit region in Pakistan, and not in Afghanistan. And quite unwillingly, the Shuan collection had to deaccession at least a fragmentary part of the collection and make it over to the Consulate of Pakistan in Norway. The Shuan collection is housed between Oslo and London. The manuscript collection is housed between Oslo and London at the moment. They also made a gift, and this is the language of exactly the homepage. The Shuan collection says that they had made, after the Taliban occupation of Afghanistan, they made a gift of first 8 and then 50 manuscript fragments to the government, which meant the exile government of to compensate and, in fact, to build upon the pre-war collections of the Kabul Museum, the National Museum of Kabul. Now, so there is a way in which manuscripts came into the collection. And though there have been acts of half-witting, return, within quotes, of course, to Pakistan and to the government of Afghanistan in exile. The question, and this was raised a number of times, that in future, when probably conditions were ripe, if it were possible, if it will be ever possible for the manuscript collection to go back again to Afghanistan from the collection, if they can be deaccessioned and they can go back to Afghanistan to be housed in the Kabul Museum. Now, of course, questions of repatriations are extremely problematic questions. I mean, there is, the idea of a singular return is as problematic as the idea of metropolitan collections holding back or on the return, on the question of a singular return of the objects. But the Shuan collection public statement still remains, it still remains very strongly that the collection can never go back to Afghanistan. So even the fragments that were presented to the government of Afghanistan in exile at one point of time. The present state is that they are deaccessioned from the Schwen collection, but they have not been made over to the Kabul Museum for purposes of safekeeping. The Schwen collection is holding on to them, and their website states quite clearly that it is the responsibility of the Schwen collection to hold these fragments, to hold these manuscripts for future, and nation states are not the sole arbitrators of cultural heritage, and organization. The language is around something like this: that nation states are not the sole arbitrators of cultural heritage, and associations which are tied to governments of nation states come and go with nation states. So they might presenting such manuscripts to them might not be in the best interest, especially since nothing could be done about the demolition of the Buddhas in the Bamir Valley in 2001 by the erstwhile Taliban government. So it is even the collection is being continuously held on, and the question of return is pushed away to a perpetual future. What happens, on the other hand, is from 2010, there is a remarkable series of exhibitions of these manuscript fragments which are mounted. The first of these exhibitions opened in 2010 in November and continue up to 2011, March 2011, in January. They are held in the site of the exhibition is the Buddha Mountain Park in Nakhon Prathom, a province literally that borders Bangkok. And the central central sculpture of the park is, of course, modeled on the Sukhothai, the 14th to 16th century Sukhothai style of the Buddha taking a step forward, which has since become the national icon of it has become the around which the myth of the origins, the original character of the Thai art history is continuously woven and sanctified. So it is in a museum that houses lone exhibitions in this huge park in the Nakhon Prathom, in the Buddha Mountain Park. Literally, Buddha Mountain means town of Buddhism. That the exhibition was housed. We cannot exactly visually reconstruct the exhibition because the supplementary catalog that came out for the exhibition was actually published before the exhibition in anticipation of the exhibition. So in November, the supplementary catalog was published already. The exhibition of 1910, 1911 in Thailand would actually mark the next series of exhibitions across ASEAN countries. These multi-sited exhibitions that would begin in India would end in Malaysia, spanning several countries and running for more than a year. And it is at the end of the exhibition, it is the culmination of the exhibition that two manuscript fragments from this collection would be gifted to Wat Saket in Thailand. Now, this is I next come to the question of site and the question why of all the monasteries did these fragments come to a? So one of the things that that I argue here, that it is in this unevenness of collections supported by multinational corporations holding on to these manuscript fragments, or even the tokenism of fragmentary returns, gifts, and donation. Donation is the term that the Schwen collection still uses in the context of Afghanistan. That we need to think about the future, the perpetual future of these manuscript fragments. Coming back to the question of the site and why the manuscript fragments came to be housed in Wat Saket and not any other complex like Wat Phra or any other complex at all. I recount the history of the site. So this part of it recounts this part of the paper recounts the history of the site, and Wat Saket is actually a temple like Wat Arun on the other side of the river in Thonburi. So Wat Saket actually is on the border of the Rattanakosin Island, the island from where Bangkok started onto the Chakris. This is, both Wat Arun and Wat Saket actually predate the finding of all major structures of Bangkok, and in fact predate the founding of Bangkok as a capital city. And any history that we have of Wat Saket, though it predates the Rattanakosin period, which is the Chakra dynasty, actually dated history only starts from the chronicle of the first reign, which is when Rama I usurps the throne, killing King Taksim. And it is in this particular context that I argue that by the time of Rama II and Rama III, the site of Wat Saket had been already laid with traveling Buddhist traces from various provinces of Thailand. For example, very important Buddhist sculptures would come in from Pittanasok, from Nakhon Prathom, and other provinces, but also from other parts of the southern Buddhist world. For example, the very important Anuradhapura, a sapling of the Anuradhapura Bodhi tree, would come to Wat Saket during the reign of Rama II. And it is this that would continue the rebuilding of Wat Saket. So the Golden Mount is just one part of Wat Saket. It's a huge complex. And the Golden Mount itself was built under the orders of this building started under the orders of Rama III, on a model of the Phrang at Ayutthaya of the same name, the old capital of Ayutthaya under the same name. And it's during the reign of Rama V or Chulalongkorn that relics discovered from the site of Piprawa Court in the Nepal, in the border of literally India and Nepal Terai, comes to Bangkok, gifted by the British government, British Indian government. The details of those conditions of those discovery and travel I have outlined elsewhere, and we can go into that in the discussion. But what I want to bring up again here is that in the circumstances of the fact that the Piprawa relics were not quite authentic and possibly forged, there was a demand even in the early 20th century for visual and textual, for photographic and textual certifications of authentication. And I have also argued elsewhere that the demand for these certifications, especially the photographs of the Piprawa relics, because the reliquaries did not travel. The corporeal remains travel sealed in a glass jar with the discoverer certification and with the cache of photographs. I've also argued that it could be understood, it could be probably tentatively argued that these photographs were also understood in a wider sense of contact. The photographic contact was also understood in a sense of making relics in a wider sense, multiplication of relics in a wider sense. Coming back to Watsakhet and how we begin to read the Bamiyan cave and the now. So these relics were enshrined at the top of the Golden Mount, and that's where most of the attention of the scholarship has been. These photographs, so the Piprawa photographs which came to Watsakhet, have now been translated into huge enlarged flexi sheets of composite photographs. So this is an absolutely separate photograph from the coffer, the original coffer in which it was discovered and which still remains in the Indian Museum. And this is actually the inscription on one of the reliquaries that was discovered in Piprawa. There are composite images of photographs and texts that are being made along the central shrine. A lot of attention has gone into, attention of studying the site has been actually about reading the shrine, reading the top of the mount. So the question I ask at the very end is, how do we read the Bamiyan Guha at Watsakhet? I propose, so the Bamiyan Guha, do we read it simply as another shrine which is added to this monastic complex? Because the Bamiyan Guha is where relic presentations where the manuscript presentations happened. The Bamiyan Guha is where we, or at least I went in for the very first time with the hope of seeing the manuscript fragments, if at all, and they can be seen in a way at the Bamiyan Guha. And how do we read this copy, this 10-meter copy? And copy, I always say with this care code. One of the things that I do not do in this paper, and I do not do it because other scholars have done it very well, beginning from Flood's essay on the Bamiyan to Kavita's essay of museums in the world. So is look at the reasons or motivations of the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas. And I do not look at the other reconstructions of the Bamiyan Buddhas, though these reconstructions are there. So Sthapati's Samadhi Buddha statue, which was reconstructed at, which was one of the reconstruction of one of the smaller Buddhas that had been destroyed in the same blast in Sri Lanka, or the 37-meter high quote-unquote replica of the Bamiyan Buddha statue at the Buddha theme park in Leshan, the very controversial project because it had already encroached, apparently, upon another UNESCO World Heritage Site already. The Leshan Buddha continues to be veiled for a very long time. But I cite this merely to indicate that this is not the first physical reconstruction. This is not the first physical, not reconstruction. This is not the first physical copy of the Bamiyan that's made outside. One of the questions, while trying to read the museum, one of the questions that I asked was whether it is a shrine, it is just another shrine, or it is an exact musealized copy of the cave system that existed on the site before its destruction. The Bamiyan Guha is the term that the site uses, the site of Wat Saket uses, the reconstructed site at Wat Saket uses. So if this is the layout of the Bamiyan Bamiyan Guha largely, this is where the signage is, the electronic signage plate is mounted on a rock-alike cast. If you can you see it? Okay. These, these signage would actually display the fragments on an electronic screen that was supposed to be a touch screen, though it is not in that condition because at the moment they're repairing it. But what it identifies this space as the museum. So the inscription outside the door of the cave just identifies it as Bamiyan Guha, the cave of the Bamiyan, and this identifies it as a museum. This leads to the last point that I am looking at in trying to look at traces of Bamiyan in Bangkok is the 10-meter long reconstruction itself. How do we begin to read such such Buddhas in an age of digital, high definition digital reproduction, not only of that lights up in the empty caverns of Bamiyan bound in a temporally bound moment, but also in cases as these. My interview so far has not quite thrown any light, and because there is no recorded history yet for this part of the reconstruction of the site itself, of the site at Wat Saket, the material medium of the Buddha remains unclear. And one of the things that the monastics with whom I had the chance to communicate during my time there, they would repeatedly stress that it is in fact the Laotian Buddha that was the model, the controversial Laotian model that becomes the model for the Bamiyan in Thailand. And this is where I leave it, rather than say this is a copy, a reproduction, a reconstruction, or a serial, aware of the fact that within a Buddhist context, it could well have been, it is received as a serial, the image, every image being in relation to the original sandalwood image. The fragments, however, both in the first exhibition catalog and here, one cannot see the fragments anymore. Physically, one cannot see the fragments anymore. They are not enshrined in this space. They are there on this signage, the electronic signage that exists at the site. The fragments are treated, the museum catalog, the catalog of the first exhibition mentions the fragments both as manuscripts and Dhammakaya, the two bodies of the Buddha, the Rupakaya and the Dhammakaya. they use that interchangeably throughout the catalog, the exhibition catalog of 2010. Here, the term that is repeatedly deployed is just manuscripts. And it is here that I leave with this, I leave the question of my attempt to read this space.
To give it a name, like why is it important to choose a name or a category? Why can't it be all of them?
It's actually, I would love if it was Bamiyan Guha Museum. That would fit in very nicely. Bamiyan Guha Museum at because the aspirations of the space inside the enclosed space at the foot of the hill in Watsaket ascribes it as a museum. It becomes, and that is the other part of the story that I cannot write in this paper, but that becomes a separate paper, is how relics assume a different kind of life in museum spaces, in Buddha galleries that are designed within officially designated museum spaces, which allows for not only spiritual aesthetic contemplation, but which is designed carefully for the ritual practice of relic worship. Like the gallery at Buddha Gallery at National Museum in New Delhi. I hope it's still there. Yes, it's still here. The gallery at the relic gallery at the Patna Museum, which is the first one which applies this model, actually. The old Patna Museum, the now dismantled Patna Museum, which had the Vaishali relics. The Buddha Gallery in the Indian Museum, which, I mean, these are spaces that are designed, and here I'm following your and Saloni's essay, actually, to look at both the travel of museal beyond the museum and the officially designated space of the museum. And I'm trying to follow it the other way around of what happens to the space inside the museum galleries. So it becomes that, but I mean, what happens to the Buddha, the Bamiyan Buddha, and that's why I'm not calling it a sculpture or a statue. Repeatedly, I'm leaving it at the Buddha. It is worshipped. It is definitely an object of worship, a subject of worship. It's a subject of ritual practice. It's also a subject of tourist enactments. It's also something that scholars come to see now increasingly at Watsaket. Watsaket is not one of the most visited sites. There is slightly another story which runs beyond the curated stories of monastic control, royal patronage at Watsaket, which is the fact that Watsaket continued for very, very long as a site of feeding the vultures' dead body. And Justin McDaniel actually talks about it in Gathering Leaves, Lifting Words, that it did not matter for very long, despite how we think of the modernizing regimes of Chulalongkorn or Vajravyud, and these are extremely autocratic, centralizing regimes too, that the Buddha and the prisoners' corpses, or and I mean, Bangkok had huge cholera epidemics, could actually inhabit the same spaces. The vultures of Watsaket are memorialized by a separate pavilion of statues of dead bodies, and I'm not going into that because that gets that pushes us into a whole economy of Buddhist parks of enactments of hell. I mean, that's a different economy altogether.
Thank you. I think you partially answered that question in response to the previous one.
Oh, sorry. This is actually the pavilion.
I was going to ask about if this section is part of any tourist network and what kind of tourists do come here. You mentioned that there are like rituals also happening here, but at the same time signage signifies that there are tourists also welcomed here. And so what kind of message is going out, and also what kind of message is being received by these tourists in terms of like, is this a museum space for them? And then Bamiyan kind of being reimagined here through this image. Is there another kind of message being sent out, like the clash happening, or there is a need of preservation of Buddhism in this context? Something like that. I don't know.
Well, thank you, Shashi. If we are to think of the in the context of Wat Saket itself, then the Golden Mount is visited by tourists because that's one of the top. That used to be the highest point of the city, of a otherwise remarkably flat city. That used to be the highest point. So it was used to keep an eye for fire, any incidents of fire, but also it had become very popular as a tourist attraction from where you could see the cityscape of Bangkok, and because of its but very few tourists actually go into the Bamiyan Guha museum.
I'm quickly going through Google reviews on the site.
Yeah.
Nothing mentions Bamiyan.
Yeah, it's actually. I mean, you can if you type. If you search for it, you can still see a few visual mentions of this space, but otherwise nothing at all. Yeah. So mostly, it's not popular. It's not a popular tourist destination, this particular section of Wat Saket. But the top of the Wat Saket is extremely popular. The top of the Wat Saket is extremely popular among tourists, also because you do not have to take your shoes off. Wat Saket is relatively relaxed on the dress code. You don't have to, you can be wearing dresses that you cannot wear, for example, if you're going to Wat Pho or Wat Phra Kae or any other major Buddhist temples in the country. Yeah, sorry, Sumati.
Oh, no, not at all. Thank you. Such a complex and interesting paper, and thanks for this discussion. And my sense is, and Rebecca, we did very well. My sense is that your papers are in such interesting, Anna, your paper and Sraman's are in such interesting dialogue, right? In terms of the question of relocation, a copy, the model, and so on. And I was actually thinking about what might be the differences. And the most striking difference is Varadaraja Swami in Kanchipuram, the idols, the image still exists, whereas in Bamiyan, it's vaporized, it's gone, right? So this made me wonder, sort of skirting around the question of the copy and the original and so on. There is no original left for your for the Bamiyan Guha, right? Whereas there is an original left for Anna's Varadaraja. You can always be comparing and say, oh, this is not as good as that, and all of. I wonder if you wanted to, if you wanted to comment on this.
Anna, you start first, or I can start.
The issue of the original and the copy. I guess both of you have that issue, right? In very different ways, it seemed to me.
So, can I, or Anna, do you want to? So, apart from its vaporizing in whatever ways it did vaporize in 2001, I don't think it's worthwhile again going over how it was destroyed.
No,
but
it doesn't exist.
Yeah. It doesn't exist, but more importantly, we don't have any traces of its existence in these minted condition. So we do not have any visual images that show the face of the Pamiyan Buddha even before the photographic traces that showed before the that these are in that sense piecing together, making that perfect image, and that's why this. I draw the citation of the original image, the sandalwood image, in that sense that it's not that it's an unchanging thing that continues across spanning millennia. It's not that, but these kinds of, we don't have a number of precedents of these kinds of reconstructions and it also has to be then for this particular image, I think it has to be placed also within the context of what is happening within Thailand. So there is a huge debate about the three historical parks, Sukhothai, Srisachinale, and Kampenpet, awarded UNESCO World Heritage Protected Site, each of them housing a number of Buddhas, and most importantly, the Sukhothai Park housing a number of Buddhas, which are actually pieced together from different places. I mean, those are not sculptures that existed as a whole, or even in a ruined state that would be reconstructed. But they were taken together from the different sites within what now is the Sukhothai Historical Park. And Maurizio Pelleggi, who talks about it, and talks about it in the context of both what was happening from the time of King Mongkut, Rama IV onwards into Chulalongkorn, that there is on one hand these so-called modernizing rational kings, the kind of absolutist monarchs, the lord of things, so to say, this Siamese Eliot. On the other hand, their forays into archaeology, the establishment of the archaeological society as a response to the Siam society, in fact, because the Siam society was constituted of expats entirely. And even the restoration of Fra Nakumcheti, those are acts of in-between worlds, and they remain as such. The collection of Buddhas at the so-called marble temple that Chulalongkorn commissioned and was carried out, in fact, by Prince Damrong Rajanubhab, which is halfway between a museum gallery and you have copies. You have originals from different provinces coming together to form a gallery, but we also have copies there. Copies coming from British museums in British India, coming from Japan. It's a wonderful, wonderful space. So I think in those senses we need to relocate. And in fact, it's populated by other Buddhas in the same space. It's not the only Buddha in the Bamiyan Gumfa. Bamiyan Gumfa is populated by other Buddhas, some of which are actually very old images that come from the site or from the Ratanakosin island itself. So, sorry, Anna.
I'll just say one thing. I'm really struck by the difference in relationship to the copy, because like the little, I don't know what you call them, the cubby holes that have always been so striking to me. They even put these here, and it's made to be a closer copy. It's made to look the same. And while Varadaraja looks the same but is 1 inch shorter, no one else looks the same, or very few, right? Like Saraswati is completely different. The temples, if you didn't know what they were, sure, they're generally north, or but they're actually not copies. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's really interesting, is that they claim over and over to be copies and to be relocating, but they're actually not. So there's something. It partakes of some kind of the ontology of the original, and yet isn't that in a way. Whereas this is much closer. So I don't have it fully worked out, but it's an
But it's very
interesting question.
Hearing, thinking of your paper now in light of this made me think about what is going on there
Yeah.
in Minnesota. Yeah. One last comment.
Yeah, just related to this, sorry. So about the original and the copy, isn't it also interesting that the Varadaraja is a copy made for a ritualistic purpose? Right, like it's 1 inch shorter for a purpose. Whereas, does this have like a specific temple-wise ritualistic context?
It's not that it does not. It's worshipped on Vesak. It's worshipped on the festival. Watsakat has a different festival altogether, which commemorates actually the end of plague in Bangkok. That's what the vultures are doing in Watsakat. That's the vulture pavilion, really. But it is worshipped. It is regularly worshipped on those days. You have to take your shoes off if you go
If
in.
you visit the barn and go
Not on regular days, but on those days you do. However, if you move very close up to that area to actually take a photograph, for what reason I do not know, but if you were to come up here to take a photograph like this, you have to take your shoes off. So that there is an invisible line almost where you take your shoes off before the Buddha.
Thank you. Thank you for the
Thank you
paper.
so much, Sraman. Let's give
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks, everyone.